Hi, and welcome to Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. We are on the porch at the Copeland Community Center today, and it's an absolutely beautiful day. Almost feels like fall. Most other places in the country already know what fall's feeling like, but we even have a few leaves changing. But it is my pleasure this morning to introduce our guest, Nancy Hillstromb. And Nancy, most people don't know you by that name.
That's correct.
And that name is that?
Birdie.
Birdie. Well, we'll talk more about that during this time together, but I thank you so much for coming and sitting down with me. You live in Park of the Pines.
That's correct.
And when did you move here?
I moved here in July of 2019.
And how did you come to know about the village?
Another resident lives here. Her name is Liz Reynolds, and she and I were RVing sisters together, and we RV'd around the country together, and she came here to live, and she said, "You got to come." She's very persuasive.
Well, I'm certainly glad she persuaded you, and we'll learn more about those adventures. Where were you born?
I was born in southwest Colorado.
And how long did you live there?
I lived there till I was about a little over 4. We had, there were 5 of us children. And my dad said Colorado was just entirely too cold. And the winter before we moved, the thermometer at the little airport froze and broke.
That's cold.
That's cold. So he said, "Red, we're moving."
Do you have memories of living in Colorado?
Very few, you know. I hear people talk about they remember things when they're like 2 and 3 years old, and I'm saying, you know, I certainly don't remember much of yesterday, but I
definitely
I don't go back that far. I remember a little bit about it because we had sheep and potatoes, and I remember the sheep. So,
and I think most people may remember things that they really can't remember by seeing pictures of them or the stories being told so many times. Yeah, I'm sure I remember my second birthday party, but but there are pictures of it. So. And where did you go after Colorado?
Well, we moved to southeast Oklahoma. We moved down in Indian Territory, Choctaws. My dad had lived down there in an Indian community, and he had a lot of friends down there, and so that's where we moved. My parents had lived there about 6 years before that, and couldn't make a living, so they moved back to Colorado. And
of the 5 children, what number are you?
I'm in the middle.
Oh, one of those middle children?
Yes, I'm a middle child now. Growing up, there was a boy between me and my older sister, but he died in a farm accident. So then we ended up 3 girls and 2 boys, and I was in the middle, an older brother and sister and a younger brother and sister. So. And
when you got to Oklahoma, what did you begin school there, or?
No, I didn't begin school there. We got there in May or June of no, that's not right. Of 49, May or June of 49. So I didn't get to start school until the following year. And that was a little school. Doesn't exist anymore. It was one of the one-room schools that held all 8 grades. And we lived about a mile and a half from there. And we did get to walk every day.
You did?
We did.
Now, was the school on a reservation, or was
No.
it just in the community? So you didn't live on the reservation?
No, they only had reservations in the western part of the state for the Plains tribes. The other 5 tribes, they had their land, but they were not known as reservations.
And did you start at kindergarten or first grade?
Primary.
Primary, okay.
I'm old enough. We had primary school, which was a combination of the first grade. So whenever we moved from that location to the homestead place, and that's when I started going to the, quote, first grade. And that's where we lived for the rest of the time.
So you finished high school there?
I finished high school, a little place called Tushka, and that's the whole southeast part. Well, the whole state of Oklahoma is Native American. Mm-hmm. So Tushka is one of the Choctaw names. But I finished school there, graduated, went to Oklahoma City, got me a job, went to work, never looked back.
So you never actually returned to farming then?
No, farming's hard work.
And what did your parents farm?
We farmed peanuts and cotton. And then my mom in the late summer would grow purple hull peas, and the ladies from town would come out and we'd go pick them. Purple hull peas by the bushel basket. So, but that was our primary livelihood was peanuts and cotton. That's hard work.
It is. And did you pick cotton yourself?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Big, started with a little sack, and by the end of the second picking season, you'd have a 21-foot sack. Be pulling that sucker down the row behind you. We actually pull bowls as opposed to picking the cotton. But if you say pull bowls, people really don't understand what you're talking about.
And in that sense, how does that differ from picking the cotton?
Well, when you pick the cotton, you actually pick the cotton fibers out of the bowl. But when you pull the bowl, you pull the whole bowl off. It weighs more if you pull bowls than if you pick cotton, because the bowl itself weighs quite a bit.
And is that is it at the same maturity level when you do that?
Oh, yeah. Doesn't matter that. It's you, whenever you're selling it as a farmer, you get a better price for picked cotton. But it takes a lot longer to do it. And usually the farmers are more concerned about getting the crop in before weather changes. Farmers there not only grew cotton, but they also did the peanuts. So you had to be very careful about the moisture in the soil for the peanuts when it needed to come out, how long they needed to dry, how moist they were when you got ready to sack them and take them in and sell them. So I hoed a lot of peanuts. I shook more peanuts than most people ever eat in their lifetime. So yeah, I've been there. I've done that.
So you got yourself a job?
I did. I got
that?
myself a job as a secretary receptionist. And I did that through one of the girls that I had gone to high school with. And she had graduated a couple of years before me. And that was out of the state capitol. So that was an interesting thing. That was a very learning experience. So I knew I didn't want to be there forever. It was cold in the wintertime, marble floors. Can you imagine? Marble floors. But yeah.
And how long did you do that?
I worked there for about a year, and then I went to work for General Electric Company. And then I stayed at the same company and changed company names from 1963 to 1981 or 82 when I left. I was GE, Honeywell, and Control Data Corporation.
That was a lot of changes.
Yes, it was.
Like a friend of mine said, when all the banking changes started, she said, I'd worked for 5 employers in the same chair.
Yes.
So that's a similar...
It was the same thing. It was the same thing. So, and then I moved with the Control Data Company from Oklahoma City to Kentucky as their personnel manager. And that's when I got my first introduction to living in mountainous areas. And I'm a flatlander. I did not like those mountains at all. You couldn't see anywhere. And Oklahoma's pretty flat. The eastern part's got some hills in it that we call mountains. But you can still, stand on the back porch and look out and see your neighbor and wave at them. They may be a half a mile down the road, but you can still see them. But, you can't do that over in the mountains. So I determined that was not my place to be.
And where did you go from there?
I went to Dallas.
Back to warmer, flatter climate.
Warmer, flatter climate, yes. And I was in Dallas until 1999. I worked for several different companies there. And in 1999, I got an opportunity to go to the birding mecca of the U.S. So I moved to Tucson, Arizona. So that was really.
And when we were chatting, you were talking about your introduction to computers and thinking that was going to be the wave of the future.
Yes, I worked for one of the companies was Xerox Corporation, and I did the customer support for their electronic typewriters, which was a little bit of a precursor to the computers. You could record things on these typewriters utilizing discs. So I did customer support on that, and then I also supported their fax machines. And I wasn't able to break into the computer area, so I left there and got me a job as a receptionist that had to operate a computer. That was my first exposure to operating a computer. And it was just all uphill from there, because it was a fact that if you were going to be working in the industrial world, you better know computers, and you better know them good. So I just went from there. I went to work for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I ended up doing IT support for their HR group. And then I went to work for Raytheon in Tucson, and I was doing IT support in their classified programs.
And you had to have a special clearance to do that?
Yeah, you had to have
Government
clearances to do that. And that's when being dull and boring was an advantage. And I worked there for quite some time, and then I transferred with them to the missile test sites out in White Sands, New Mexico. So I lived in Las Cruces and commuted into the test site, and I retired from there.
Now, didn't you tell me at one point you got to Florida in the middle of summer?
Yeah, my first exposure to Florida. Yeah, I was working for Raytheon in Tucson, and one of the programs I supported had facilities in Orlando, a spot in Alabama, in Dallas, and in Tucson. And I would rotate every couple of months. I'd have to go visit all of those sites for their IT things and checking the security stuff on it. So I landed in Orlando, Florida in August, and it was like just, 105 degrees. I said, well, that's not bad. We have 105 degrees out, 115 in Tucson. But where Tucson would have 15% humidity, I walked out with 95% humidity, and it's like, if you're not a fish, you're not going to live here very long. So that was quite an experience.
So did that make you say, well, I'm never going to live in Florida?
No.
So you don't have to eat those words?
No. I did come down to Florida for the Y2K turnover, because they didn't have support here. They had a lot of support in the other places. So they had to have somebody here just in case the computers failed. We had one failed, but all the rest of them went through, so it was no big deal.
That was a big planning exercise for the country.
Oh, it was, yeah. So, yeah, you had little pins of where everybody was going to be. And, you better not be celebrating New Year's too much, because you're going to be, the next day, you're going to be looking at these little computers. So, yeah.
But it was one time, I think, that all that planning paid off. That things were in place and the systems did what they were supposed to. So,
absolutely.
For the most part.
Absolutely. Very few places actually had major failures. Like they were really fearful. So, got to plan it out.
That's right.
Got to have a fallback.
Now you want to tell us how you became known as Birdie.
Oh, yeah. When I was in Tucson working at Raytheon, we had different programs that you would be assigned to. And one of the programs I was assigned to, there were 4 Nancys in the building, but there were 3 Nancys that worked together doing various assignments on the program there. And we would go to meetings, and any given point in time, all 3 of us would be in the meeting. And somebody would say, well, Nancy, so we would all 3 answer. So they said, this is not working. This is not working. So they looked around. One of the Nancys was redheaded, and they said, okay, you're red. They said, okay, what about these others? So Red was a good friend of mine. She turns around, pats me on the shoulder, and she said, well, my good friend Birdie here, if you ever have any questions about birds, just ask her. Tell her what it looks like. Tell her what it sounds like. She'll tell you what it is. I became Birdie. So it just kind of fit.
But it also has meaning
Because I am a birder. I moved to Tucson for birding, the birding mecca. It's got desert birds, it's got the ground level, it's got changes all the way up to the montane birds. So, yeah. And it's so close to Mexico that you get birds that do not live in the U.S. that get blown in or just disperse after breeding, and they'll come in, and that's a big deal. When you see a bird that's not a U.S.-based bird, people fly from all over the U.S., well, all over the world sometimes, to get to see that bird.
Tell us about the most unusual bird.
The little fantail redstart bird. Yeah, he was being seen down in one of the mountainous areas, and so a couple of friends of mine and I, we said, let's go get him. So we go down there. We're all knocked out and all this good stuff, and all of a sudden this little bird flies right across in front of me. I said, there it goes. And one of the other girls had already seen it, and she said, yeah, that's it. So he does his little fantail thing out, and then he takes off, and 2 hours later, a hawk got him. He was gone. People still wanted to count him, but, he wasn't twitching. You couldn't count him.
That has to be a disappointment if you've traveled all that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
And what do you do about birding now that you live here?
I still bird. I'm not as active in birding as I am, but I can still pretty well identify the birds. And I take my binoculars with me, and Tom may have seen me with my binoculars on my porch or out in my yard looking around trying to find something I'm hearing and I can't identify it. So that usually says you need to go find that bird and find out what it is.
Now, are you a photographer of birds, or is your primary?
I have done photography of them, but you really got to have the lens to do that. And I didn't have a desire to put that kind of money in those lenses. My brother and my sister-in-law both have fantastic photos, and they've traveled internationally to take photos of birds. And they're very good at it. But I didn't want to put the money and the time into it.
Mm-hmm. It takes, I'm sure, a lot of waiting.
Yes.
To find that bird, and then
and just sit there and be ready. And my attention doesn't last that long. I'm looking at something else when the bird comes through. So.
Well, I know that you have done a lot of RVing and camping, and so how did that interest start?
That interest started in while I worked. Vacation time usually meant going home and seeing the family wherever I was. So whenever I retired, I said, I want to travel around, see part of the U.S. So I had started looking at ways to facilitate that, and I decided a little travel trailer would be a good thing. So I got a little casita travel trailer, and I got that just before I retired. So there I am.
Now that's a term, the casita is...
That's the name.
Oh, that's the brand name.
It's a fiberglass. It's a little fiberglass.
Oh, okay.
And they make, at that time they made 3 different sizes, so I got the larger of the size, and I said, this'll do. So I did that, and I'm sitting out there one Monday morning, and it was just beautiful, and the birds were singing, and I'm saying, I could get used to doing this all the time. So I decided maybe I ought to do that. So got my household goods out of storage, went through them, sold them, gave them away, kept what I wanted, put it in storage, got in my little casita and hit the road. Did that for a while and said, this is really isn't big enough to be on the road all the time. So I sold the casita. I got a Class C RV, about 30 foot. I started traveling. I liked that. And then I said, I like this, but I want something different. This is just not really it. So I got me a nice Class A, said okay. So I was ready to go to Alaska. So.
And I understand you met a lot of people online.
Yes, there are lots of forums out there, but 10 years ago they were less than there are now. Uh-huh. But there was one forum for women who RV. And there are a lot of women that RV alone. And that's how I met Liz Reynolds, was through that forum. And we met. We liked being around each other. We had a lot of the different kinds of desires, hiking. She wanted to learn birding. And so, she taught me a lot about canoeing, kayaking, canoeing. So hiking, she was one of my major influences in my hiking. So we started meeting up and doing some RVing things, and we decided that we'd like to make a trip to Alaska. So we did that. That was great. That was great. Birds, wild animals, hiking, marvelous hiking. That was great. We had a good time.
And you met a lot of other people that way.
Oh, yeah.
And you were telling me stories about parking in their driveways.
Oh, yeah. I met two ladies that lived in Michigan. One of them I met when I was spending the winter in the Rio Grande Valley down in Texas. And I ended up going up and parking in her son's driveway. And I was up there for probably 3 or 4 weeks. And another lady I met on the forum, I parked in her driveway for a couple of weeks. And that was in Lower Michigan. And then another lady I met, she was in New York, outside Syracuse. And I parked in her driveway, helped her build a fence around her yard. That was interesting.
I bet.
That was my first experience to go down a river that had locks on it. That was, I enjoyed that.
I bet.
You get see a lot of places that you wouldn't ordinarily see, even if you went to these places, because you just wouldn't think that it would be available for you to go get on. So meeting those people and having them to serve as your individual guide is really great.
Person who really knows the area.
Yeah.
Since moving to the village, you've become involved in some volunteer work. Would you tell us about that?
Yes, I volunteer at the Rustic Shop. I have worked at the clothing store, the Twice Nice Clothing, and I've did some material sorting for Susie Hudson. And as a result of working with her, she talked me into applying for a job and working with her there at the lodge. Unfortunately, she has passed away, but I still will be doing some of the work there at the lodge. Probably won't end up being what she had in mind, but that's the way life goes.
That's right.
So I'm still volunteering at the Rustic Shop. Sometimes I work the desk, and other times I'm cutting out bibs and aprons, and it's enjoyable. I'm surprised they don't have more volunteers. You meet a lot of people, because we get a lot of people that come in from outside. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting.
Well, with it being approaching the holiday season, I know some people are wondering, are the Rustic Shop and the Twice Nice or Riverside Gifts, are they going to have Christmas items?
Yes, we will be. We're ordering those right now, going through the process, trying to get them in so we can get them stocked up and get our Christmas scene all set up and ready to go. We're getting ready.
That's good. Time's approaching.
Save your money.
And that was our commercial for the today. Would you share, as we're wrapping up here, a little bit about a recent trip you made and who you encountered on the way?
I made a trip to East Texas to house sit for family members, and they have horses and cows and alpacas, dogs and cats and chickens and ducks. So my job was to feed and take care of them. So I made that trip. I took my RV. I left 3 days after Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans.
That's who you met along the way.
I met Hurricane Ida. What a storm. A little town of Hammond up by Baton Rouge just really got hammered. Really bad. I mean, big old pine trees, bigger than the pine trees you see here, snapped in two. They look like toothpicks out there. Just absolutely unreal. But the road was clear because their I-10 is a major thoroughfare for trucks. And they can do 20, but Ida was headed up to 20. Mm-hmm. So those guys are out there. They had those trees cleared out of the road. It was clear, but if they'd have had very much more rain, there'd have been water over the road. So,
what was the term you used about the ditches?
Oh, the bar ditches.
I had never heard that term.
Yeah, well, I was saying that the bar ditches were really running high with water. The water was about 6 inches from the road because it was running in the bar ditches. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that educational process. And now I want to thank you all for tuning in today and watching Front Porch Conversations. I hope you'll tune in again to meet other guests here on the porch.